I never thought I'd be typing these words with trembling fingers. But the daughter I raised with every ounce of love in my body is the same person who forced me to sleep in a dusty attic while she and her husband took over my bedroom. They believed they had all the power until the day I revealed the shocking truth that would change everything. I owned their entire mortgage. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Meredith Harlow. At 63, I expected to be enjoying the peaceful golden years of my life in Willowbrook, the charming coastal town where I'd built my life from scratch. After losing my husband Preston to cancer 15 years ago, I'd managed to transform our small savings into a comfortable nest egg through careful investments and my thriving botanical illustration business. I wasn't wealthy by any means, but I was secure, at least financially. Emotionally was another matter entirely. My only daughter, Zara, had always been the center of my universe. From the moment I first held her in my arms, I promised to give her everything I never had: stability, education, and unwavering support. When Preston died, that promise only intensified. I became both mother and father, working tirelessly to ensure Zara never felt the absence of her father in terms of opportunities or experiences. The irony wasn't lost on me that my dedication to giving her everything would eventually lead to her taking everything from me. It began innocently enough. Zara and her husband Nico had been married for 3 years when they approached me about temporarily moving into my home while they renovated their first house, a charming Victorian in Oakridge Heights they'd purchased 6 months earlier. "It's just for 3 months, Mom," Zara assured me, her hazel eyes, so like her father's, wide with sincerity. "The contractor found black mold in the basement, and it's not safe for us to stay there during remediation." "Of course you can stay," I said without hesitation. My 3-bedroom craftsman had felt too large, too empty since Preston died. "You know this will always be your home." Those words would come back to haunt me in ways I couldn't imagine. The first week was blissful. Having Zara back under my roof reminded me of happier times. We cooked together, shared bottles of wine on the porch swing, and for the first time in years, laughter echoed through the hallways of my home. Nico was charming and attentive, always offering to help with household repairs or technology issues. I remember thinking how fortunate Zara was to have found such a caring partner, how blind I was. The shift was gradual, almost imperceptible at first. Small comments about how outdated my furniture looked, gentle suggestions that perhaps I should modernize the kitchen. Boxes of their belongings multiplying in the living room, my own possessions slowly migrating to corners and closets to make space. "Mom, would you mind if we replace this sofa?" Zara asked one evening, bouncing slightly on my beloved navy couch, the one Preston and I had purchased when we first moved in. "It's sagging in the middle, and Nico's back hurts when he sits here." Before I could respond, Nico chimed in. "We found a perfect sectional that would really open up the space. We'll cover it, of course." I agreed, telling myself it was temporary. They needed comfort during this transition. The couch was old, all reasonable justifications. When their sectional arrived, an enormous gray monstrosity that dominated the living room, I noticed my reading chair had been moved to the garage to make space. "We'll bring it back in once everything's settled," Zara promised, but her attention was already elsewhere, directing the delivery men on the exact placement of their new furniture. That pattern repeated itself with alarming frequency. My kitchen. Cabinets were reorganized because it makes more sense this way. My bedroom television was upgraded to a smart TV because you'll love the streaming options, Mom. My garden redesigned because native plants are more sustainable. Each change was presented as an improvement, a gift, an act of care, and perhaps that's why I accepted them without protest. After all, weren't these the natural compromises of shared living? Then came the conversation that made my blood run. Cold. I was returning from my weekly watercolor class, walking up the stone path to my front door when I heard raised voices through the open kitchen window. I paused, keys in hand, not intending to eavesdrop but caught by the anger in Nico's tone. "It's been 4 months, Zara. 4. And we're still living with your mother like we're college students." I know, Zara sighed. "But the renovation?" "Timeline." "There is no renovation!" Nico's voice cracked like a whip. "We haven't even started the work. The contractor's estimate is just sitting on my desk." A heavy silence followed, during which I stood frozen, unable to move closer or retreat. "What do you want me to do?" Zara finally asked, her voice smaller now. "We need to be more aggressive." The refrigerator door opened and closed. "Your mother is sitting on this massive house all by herself. She doesn't need 3 bedrooms. We do, especially if we're going to start a family." "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying we need to make this arrangement permanent. Get her to sign over the house to us." "She won't do that," Zara protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Everyone has their pressure points, babe. Your mom's is you. She'd do anything. For you. We just need to make her believe this is what's best for everyone." I felt sick. Physically, violently ill. The keys slipped from my trembling fingers, clattering loudly on the stone path. The conversation inside immediately hushed. I quickly retrieved my keys, took several deep breaths, and entered my home as if I'd heard nothing. Zara and Nico greeted me with smiles that now seemed sinister in their calculation. "How was class, Mom?" Zara asked, her voice perfectly normal, perfectly loving. "Wonderful," I lied, hanging my bag on the hook by the door, a hook that had been moved 3 inches to the left because Nico kept bumping his shoulder on it. "I'm a bit tired, though. Think I'll lie down for a bit." In my bedroom, I sat on the edge of my bed, the only piece of furniture that remained unchanged, and tried to make sense of what I'd heard. Had I misunderstood? Was there an innocent explanation? The rational part of my brain searched desperately for alternative interpretations, but my gut knew the truth. My daughter and her husband had moved in with no intention of leaving. That night, I barely slept. By morning, I'd made a decision to confront them directly. Clear communication was always the foundation of my relationship with Zara. Surely we could discuss this misunderstanding like adults. I waited until breakfast, when the 3 of us were seated around the kitchen table, a new glass-topped monstrosity that had replaced my cherished oak farmhouse table. "I wanted to ask about the renovations," I began carefully, stirring honey into my tea. "It's been 4 months now. How is the progress coming along?" Zara and Nico exchanged a quick glance. "It's complicated," Zara hedged. "The mold remediation uncovered some structural issues with the foundation." "Really?" I kept my tone neutral. "That sounds serious. And expensive." "Very," Nico confirmed grimly. "We're looking at extending the timeline by at least another 6 months." I nodded slowly. "I see. And have you had to adjust your budget for these unexpected costs?" Another glance between them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. More transparent than they realized. "We're figuring it out," Zara said vaguely. "The contractor is working with us." "I'd like to see the property," I said, taking a sip of tea. "Perhaps this weekend? I might have some suggestions that could help." The panic that flashed across their faces confirmed everything. "That's not necessary, Mom," Zara said quickly. "It's a construction zone, not safe for visitors." "Besides," Nico added with a practiced smile, "we wouldn't want to burden you with our problems. You've already done so much by letting us stay here." I let the subject drop, but the die was cast. That evening, I drove to Oakridge Heights to see their house for myself. The Victorian stood quiet and undisturbed, no signs of construction equipment or ongoing work. Through the windows, I could see furniture draped with sheets, exactly as one would expect in a house temporarily vacated, not one undergoing major renovations. My heart ached with a pain that surpassed even my grief when Preston died. My husband's death had been beyond anyone's control, a cruel act of fate. This betrayal was deliberate, calculated, chosen. I returned home to find Zara and Nico watching, television in the living room, completely at ease in their deception. I said nothing about my discovery, needing time to process what this meant and decide how to respond. Over the next few days, I observed them with new awareness. The casual way they rearranged my belongings without asking. The dismissive tone when addressing my concerns about a leaky faucet or drafty window. The whispered conversations that abruptly ended when I entered a room. Then came the suggestion that would push me to my breaking point. "Mom?" Zara began one evening, her voice honey-sweet in a way that now set off alarm bells. "Nico and I have been talking. We're worried about you. Using those steep stairs every day with your arthritis." I blinked in confusion. "I don't have arthritis." She waved away my correction as if swatting a fly. "You know what I mean. You're not getting any younger, and falls are the leading cause of injury in people over 60. I'm perfectly capable of navigating my own staircase, Zara," I said, an edge creeping into my voice. "Of course you are," she soothed. "But wouldn't it make more sense for you to use the converted attic bedroom? It's cozy, and you'd have your own bathroom. Plus, Nico and I could take the master bedroom, which would give us more space to set up a nursery in the guest room when the time comes." The suggestion was so brazen, so entitled, that for a moment I couldn't respond. They wanted to relegate me to the attic of my own home, the small space Preston had converted into a home office years ago. It had a sloped ceiling where you couldn't stand upright unless you were in the very center of the room, a tiny bathroom with a shower where the water never quite got hot enough, and poor insulation that made it freezing in winter and sweltering in summer. "You want me to move to the attic?" I finally managed. "It's not like that," Zara protested, though her flushed cheeks betrayed her. "We're just trying to find the best arrangement for everyone while we're all sharing the house." "The house that I own," I reminded her quietly. "Well, technically, yes," Nico interjected, his tone reasonable and measured like he was explaining something to a child. "But family is about sharing, right? About supporting each other through difficult times?" I wanted to scream, to rage, to demand they leave immediately. But 63 years of being nice and accommodating don't vanish in an instant. Instead, I found myself nodding, agreeing to consider it, and retreating to my bedroom, soon to be their bedroom, to think. That night, I made 2 decisions that would change everything. First, I would give them exactly what they wanted, moving to the attic without complaint. And second, I would begin gathering the resources and evidence to reclaim what was mine. The following weekend, I packed my belongings and relocated to the attic. Zara seemed momentarily thrown by my lack of resistance, but quickly recovered. "You'll love it up here, Mom," she insisted, arranging a vase of daisies on the small desk beneath the window. "It's like having your own private apartment." If by apartment she meant prison cell, perhaps she was right. The space was cramped. The air stale despite the single window I kept open whenever possible. The ceiling sloped so severely that I bumped my head at least 3 times a day until I learned to move like a hunched creature, always aware of the limitations of my space. From my attic perch, I watched as Zara and Nico continued their takeover of my home. They repainted walls without consultation, replaced more furniture, and gradually moved my photographs and mementos into storage boxes that found their way to the garage or basement. But while they believed they were cementing their control, I was silently working on my counteroffensive. The first step was understanding exactly what I was dealing with. Late one night, while they were at a dinner party, I searched their room. In Nico's desk drawer, I found bank statements revealing massive credit card debt, over $87,000 spread across multiple cards. Another folder contained overdue notices for their mortgage, now 3 months in arrears. The renovation story wasn't just a lie to stay in my home. It was a cover for their financial disaster. I also discovered something that made my blood run cold. Preliminary paperwork for transferring property ownership, with blank spaces where my signature would go. They weren't just planning to stay. They were planning to take my home entirely. Armed with this knowledge, I contacted my old friend Lorelei, a retired attorney who had helped me with Preston's estate. Her advice was clear. Document everything, secure my assets, and prepare for a confrontation that would likely end my relationship with my daughter. "Are you prepared for that possibility, Meredith?" she asked gently over coffee at her lakeside condo, far from any chance of being overheard. I stared into my cup, watching the light play across the surface of the dark liquid. "I don't think I have a relationship with my daughter anymore," I said finally. "Not a real one, not one based on love and respect." The admission hurt, but it also freed something in me. The constant hope that things would improve, that Zara would remember the values I'd raised her with, had kept me trapped in a cycle of disappointment and manipulation. Now, I could see clearly what needed to be done. The next morning, I contacted my bank to verify the security of my accounts, and was horrified to discover several unexplained withdrawals over the past 3 months. Small enough to escape immediate notice but totaling nearly $12,000. When I questioned the teller about these transactions, she confirmed they had been made using my debit card and PIN. A debit card that had mysteriously disappeared and been replaced by Zara, who had insisted on handling the call to the bank to save me the hassle. "Would you like to file a fraud claim, Ms. Harlow?" the bank manager asked when I explained the situation. The question gave me pause. Filing fraud charges would mean explicitly accusing my daughter of theft. Despite everything, I hesitated. "Not at this time," I finally said, "but I'd like to freeze all access to my accounts except through in-person visits with ID verification." Back home, I sat in my attic room, surrounded by boxes of my diminished life, and made a careful inventory of everything that had been taken from me, financially, emotionally, physically. The list was longer than I expected, and with each item added, my resolve strengthened. That evening, when I descended for dinner, I was still allowed to eat with them in what had once been my kitchen. Zara noticed my subdued mood. "Is everything okay, Mom? You seem quiet." I measured my response carefully. "I'm just thinking about some financial matters. Nothing to worry about." Nico perked up immediately, like a predator sensing weakness. "Financial matters? Anything we can help with?" "Actually," I said, pushing my food around my plate, "I'm concerned about my retirement savings. The market hasn't been kind lately." The trap was set, and they walked right into it. "You know," Nico said, attempting to sound casual, "Zara and I have been talking. Your house is worth quite a bit now, probably triple what you and Dad paid for it. Have you considered downsizing? You could free up all that equity, invest it, and have a much more comfortable retirement." Zara nodded enthusiastically. "There are those lovely senior communities near Riverwalk. One-level living, activities, people your age." I widened my eyes in manufactured concern. "But those places are expensive, aren't they? And what would happen to you two?" "Well," Zara said, exchanging a quick glance with Nico, "we could take over the mortgage here. It would help us out, and you'd be free from all this maintenance and worry." I let my face show hesitation, then gradual acceptance. "That's actually something to consider. Let me think about it." The relief and triumph that flashed across their faces would have been comical if it weren't so heartbreaking. They truly believed they had won. Over the next few days, they intensified their campaign. Brochures for retirement communities mysteriously appeared on my nightstand. Nico casually mentioned a friend who specialized in transitioning seniors to appropriate housing. Zara began pointing out every creak in the floorboard, every flicker of the lights, as evidence that the house was becoming unsafe for me. While they plotted my removal, I was busy with my own plans. First, I visited my safe deposit box at the bank and retrieved the documents I needed. Then, I made an appointment with Lawrence Kaplan, the longtime family attorney who had handled Preston's affairs after his death. Finally, I arranged a meeting with Marlene Chen at Coastal Community Bank. "Ms. Harlow," Marlene greeted me warmly in her office overlooking the harbor. "It's been too long. How can I help you today?" I placed a folder on her desk. "I need information about a mortgage loan that I believe is held by your bank." She frowned slightly. "You know I can't disclose details about other customers' accounts, even if I'm the one who co-signed the loan?" I slid a document across the desk, the original mortgage agreement for Zara and Nico's Victorian in Oakridge Heights, bearing my signature as guarantor. Marlene's expression cleared as she examined the document. "I see. In that case, yes, I can discuss this with you." What followed was a sobering confirmation of what I'd already suspected. Zara and Nico hadn't made a mortgage payment in 4 months. The bank was preparing foreclosure proceedings. Their financial house of cards was on the verge of collapse. But there was something else, something I hadn't known until that moment. "Ms. Harlow, are you aware that as co-signer, you're fully liable for this debt if they default?" I nodded slowly. I understood that when I signed. What I didn't understand was how quickly they would abandon their responsibilities. Marlene looked sympathetic. "You have options. Since you're not on the title, you could let it go to foreclosure, though that would affect your credit. Or I could assume the loan," I finished for her. "Take over the payments and eventually take possession of the property." She nodded. "Exactly. Though that would require significant resources on your part." I smiled for the first time that day. What if I told you I already have those resources? 3 hours later, I left the bank with a new arrangement in place. The mortgage on Zara and Nico's Victorian now had a single name on it: mine. I had effectively purchased their house out from under them, without their knowledge. The foreclosure proceedings were halted, and Coastal Community Bank was very happy to have transformed a potential loss into a guaranteed return. What Zara and Nico never knew, what I had never seen a need to share with them, was that Preston had left me far better provided for than they realized. His life insurance policy, combined with prudent investments over 15 years, had created a financial cushion they couldn't begin to imagine. I wasn't wealthy, but I was secure enough to act when necessary. And now I owned both houses, the one they lived in with me and the one they had abandoned. That night, I slept more peacefully than I had in months, despite the lumpy mattress and drafty windows of my attic room. I had taken back control in one significant way, but I wasn't ready to reveal my hand just yet. There were still more pieces to put in place. The following week brought a new development. I returned from my watercolor class to find an unfamiliar elderly woman sitting in my living room, engaged in animated conversation with Zara. "Mom!" Zara exclaimed with excessive brightness. "This is Vivian from Sunset Haven Senior Living. I mentioned how you were considering your options, and she was kind enough to come by for an informal chat." I set down my art supplies slowly, taking in the scene. The brochures spread across my coffee table, the eager smile on Vivian's face, the triumphant gleam in Zara's eyes. They were accelerating their timeline. "How thoughtful," I said, my voice carefully neutral, though I don't recall agreeing to meet with anyone yet. "It's just preliminary information," Zara said quickly. "No commitment." Vivian stood, extending a hand. "We have a lovely one-bedroom unit available next month. Zara mentioned you enjoy gardening? We have community plots available for residents." I smiled thinly. How convenient that a unit is available so soon. Over the next hour, I listened as Vivian extolled the virtues of Sunset Haven, the scheduled activities, the meal service, the 24-hour emergency response system. All for the reasonable monthly fee of $3,500, not including additional care services I might eventually need. And the best part, Vivian concluded, is that we handle the sale of your current home for you. Our partnership with Meridian Realty makes the transition seamless. I nodded thoughtfully. That does sound convenient. May I ask who at Meridian handles these arrangements? Marcus Jennings, Vivian said promptly. He specializes in senior transitions. Marcus Jennings, I repeated. Nico's racquetball partner, if I'm not mistaken. A flicker of surprise crossed Zara's face before she composed herself. Is he? What a small world. Indeed, I agreed pleasantly. Thank you, Vivian. This has been most informative. I'll certainly consider Sunset Haven when I'm ready to make a change. After Vivian left, Zara could barely contain her excitement. She said they could have you moved in by the end of next month. And they take care of everything. The house sale, the moving arrangements, all of it. It's a big decision, I said carefully. I'd want to consult with an attorney before signing anything. Zara's smile faltered slightly. An attorney? That's not necessary, Mom. Sunset Haven handles these transitions all the time. It's routine. Even so, I insisted. I'll speak with Lawrence Kaplan next week. Lawrence is old, Mom, Zara said dismissively. He's probably ready for Sunset Haven himself. Nico has a colleague who specializes in elder law. He'd be much more up to date. I shook my head. I prefer Lawrence. He's handled our family affairs for decades. The flash of frustration that crossed Zara's face told me everything I needed to know. They had a plan, complete with their own attorney who would undoubtedly guide me toward decisions that benefited them rather than me. That night, I heard them arguing in their bedroom. My old bedroom. Their voices carried through the heating, vent that connected to the attic. She's getting suspicious, Zara hissed. Mentioning Kaplan like that. Calm down, Nico replied. She's just being cautious. That's normal. We need to move faster. What if she changes her mind? Then, we'll find another approach. The important thing is to get her name off this house and our names on it. And what about our house? The bank called again today. A pause. What did you tell them? That we're working on it, Zara said, her voice tight with anxiety. But they're talking about foreclosure now. We need her to sign over this place before that happens, or we'll have nowhere to go. I had heard enough. Quietly, I moved away from the vent and sat on the edge of my bed, thinking. Their desperation was increasing, which made them both more dangerous and more vulnerable. I needed to accelerate my own timeline. The next morning, I left early, leaving a note that I was spending the day with Lorelei. Instead, I drove to Oakridge Heights and parked in front of Zara and Nico's Victorian. Using the spare key I'd been given for emergencies, I let myself in. The house stood silent and stale, unlived in for months now. Dust sheets covered the furniture. Mail had piled up inside the door despite their claims of checking on the property regularly. I made my way through each room, taking photographs with my phone, documenting the abandoned state of the home. There was no sign of renovation, work, no evidence of black mold remediation, no construction materials or tools, just a perfectly sound house that had been deserted for a lie. In the kitchen, I found stacks of overdue bills, utilities, credit cards, property taxes. Nico's home office contained even more damning evidence: collection notices, denied loan, applications, and a letter from his employer warning about excessive absences. The picture became clearer with each discovery. They weren't just trying to take my home. They were drowning financially and saw my property as their lifeline. The depth of their deception was breathtaking. I took more photographs, gathered key documents, and left everything else exactly as I had found it. Back in my car, I sent the images to Lawrence Kaplan with a brief message explaining the situation. His response was immediate. "Come to my office. Tomorrow, 10 a.m." That evening, I maintained my role as the acquiescent mother considering a move to senior living. I asked questions about Sunset Haven, expressed appropriate concern about the cost, and gently probed about their plans for my house, if I decided to move. "We were thinking," Nico said, all practiced casualness, "that it might make sense for us to take over your mortgage. Since we're family, we could keep it simple. No real estate agents or banks involved." "Just a transfer of deed," Zara added eagerly. "Lawrence Kaplan could handle it if you insist on using him." I nodded thoughtfully. "That seems sensible, though I'd want fair market value, of course." They exchanged quick glances. "About that," Nico began cautiously, "given the work the house needs, new roof, updated electrical, not to mention the foundation issues, we were thinking more of an arrangement where we take over the remaining mortgage balance, which is considerably less than the market value," I noted. "Yes, but we'd be saving you the hassle of repairs and realtor fees," Zara explained as if doing me a tremendous favor. "Plus, the house stays in the family." I sipped my tea, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably before responding. "I'll discuss the options with Lawrence tomorrow." The flash of alarm that passed between them was almost comical. They hadn't anticipated I would actually follow through with consulting my attorney. "I could go with you," Zara offered quickly. "Help explain what we're thinking." "That won't be necessary," I said firmly. "This is a preliminary consultation about my options. If we move forward with any arrangement involving the house, you'll certainly be included in those discussions." That night, I packed a small bag with essentials: documents, medications, a few clothes, and the framed photograph of Preston that I'd managed to keep in my attic exile. Whatever happened tomorrow would set a new course, and I needed to be prepared for all possibilities. Morning came with a sense of both dread and determination. I dressed carefully in a tailored suit I hadn't worn in years, the one Preston had always said made me look formidable. I needed that armor today. Downstairs, Zara was already awake, pacing the kitchen with barely contained anxiety. "You're up early," I observed, "and dressed for work. I thought you had Thursdays off." She startled slightly. "Oh, schedule change. Listen, Mom, about the meeting with Lawrence." "Yes? I really think I should come with you. These legal matters can be confusing and—" "I've been handling legal matters since before you were born, Zara," I interrupted, my voice firmer than usual. "I'm perfectly capable of understanding my options and making my own decisions." Her face flushed. "I'm just trying to help." "I know," I said, softening slightly, "and I appreciate it. But this is something I need to do on my own first. We can discuss everything afterward." She didn't look convinced, but she nodded reluctantly. "Will you be home for dinner?" "I'm not sure," I said honestly. "Don't wait for me." Lawrence Kaplan's office was exactly as I remembered it. Wood-paneled walls lined with law books, the faint scent of pipe tobacco, though he'd quit smoking years ago, and the comforting presence of the man himself. At 72, Lawrence was still sharp as a tack, his silver hair and bow tie giving him the appearance of a distinguished professor rather than a seasoned attorney. "Meredith," he greeted me warmly, rising from behind his desk. "It's been too long." "Not by choice," I said, taking the offered seat. "Life has a way of getting complicated." "So I gather from your message and these photographs." He gestured to a folder on his desk, the evidence I'd sent him. "Before we begin, I want to be clear about something. What you've described, potentially, involves elder abuse, both financial and emotional. If that's the case, we have options beyond just civil remedies." I shook my head. I'm not interested in pressing charges or involving authorities, Lawrence. I just want my home and my dignity back. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. I understand. In that case, let's discuss your current situation and the options available to you. For the next 2 hours, Lawrence listened as I detailed everything, from the initial request to move in temporarily, to their gradual takeover of my home, to my discovery of their financial troubles and the plotting to force me into senior living while they took possession of my house. When I explained how I'd purchased their mortgage out from under them, he actually chuckled. Meredith Harlow, you never cease to amaze me. Preston would be proud. Would he? I wondered aloud. Or would he be heartbroken to see what our daughter has become? Lawrence's expression sobered. Perhaps both. But he would certainly approve of you standing up for yourself. Now, let's talk about next steps. By the time I left Lawrence's office, I had a clear path forward and the legal documents to support it. I also had the keys to a small apartment Lawrence had helped me secure, a temporary refuge if things at home became untenable. Instead of returning home immediately, I drove to Oakridge Heights once more. This time, I didn't just inspect the house, I began to clean it. I opened windows to air out the stale rooms. I dusted furniture and swept floors. I collected the scattered mail and organized it neatly on the entry table. I wasn't preparing the house for them, I was preparing it for what came next. It was nearly 7 in the evening when I finally returned home, finding Zara and Nico waiting in the living room like sentries. Their expressions shifted from anxiety to relief when I walked through the door. "Mom!" Zara exclaimed, jumping up. "We were worried. You didn't answer your phone." I set down my purse calmly. I turned it off during my meeting with Lawrence, and forgot to turn it back on. "I'm sorry if I caused you concern." "How did the meeting go?" Nico asked, trying and failing to sound casual. "Very informative," I said, hanging my coat in the closet. Lawrence had some excellent insights about my situation. They waited expectantly, but I offered nothing more, moving toward the kitchen to make a cup of tea. They followed like anxious shadows. "Did you discuss the house?" Zara finally pressed. When I remained silent, I turned to face them, teacup in hand. "Yes, we discussed the house. Both houses, actually." The color drained from Nico's face. "Both houses?" "Yes," I said evenly. "This one and the Victorian in Oakridge Heights that you abandoned 4 months ago. The one with no black mold, no renovation work, and no structural issues. The one you're about to lose to foreclosure." They froze, the blood draining from their faces as they realized I knew everything. "Mom, we can explain," Zara began, her voice trembling. I held up a hand to silence her. "I've seen the house, Zara. I've seen the bills, the collection notices, the warning letter from Nico's employer. There's nothing to explain. You lied to me, consistently and deliberately, to exploit my generosity while planning to take my home from me." "That's not fair," Nico protested weakly. "We were just trying to find a solution that worked for everyone." "A solution," I repeated. "Is that what you call forcing me into an attic while plotting to ship me off to a retirement home and steal my house? Is that what you call lying about renovations that don't exist and financial problems you created through your own irresponsibility?" Zara's eyes filled with tears. Whether genuine or another performance, I couldn't tell anymore. "We made mistakes, Mom. We got in over our heads, but we're family. Can't we work this out?" "Family," I echoed, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "Is that what we are? Because from where I stand, family doesn't treat each other this way. Family doesn't lie and manipulate and steal." "We never stole from you," Nico insisted. I laughed, a short, harsh sound that surprised even me. "The $12,000 from my bank account says otherwise. The wedding silver that's mysteriously missing says otherwise. My attic exile says otherwise." They had no response to that. standing in stunned silence as their carefully constructed web of lies collapsed around them. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued, my voice steady and controlled. "Tomorrow morning, you will pack your belongings and vacate my house. You will return any items of mine that you've appropriated. You will provide a full accounting of funds taken from my accounts without authorization." "And go where?" Zara demanded, finding her voice again. "You know we can't afford another place right now." "Actually," I said, setting down my teacup, "you can return to your Victorian in Oakridge Heights. I've spent the afternoon cleaning it for you." Confusion crossed their faces. "But the foreclosure," Nico began, "has been halted," I finished for him. "Because as of last week, I own your mortgage." The silence that followed my announcement was deafening. Zara and Nico stood frozen, their expressions shifting from confusion to disbelief as the implications of my words sank in. "You... what?" Zara finally stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I purchased your mortgage from Coastal Community Bank," I repeated calmly. "They were quite eager to offload a loan that was heading for default. As your guarantor, I was able to assume full ownership of the debt and potentially the property." Nico's face had turned an alarming shade of gray. "You can't do that. It's not legal." I smiled thinly. "Lawrence assures me it's perfectly legal. I have all the documentation if you'd like to review it." "This is insane," Zara hissed, her shock transforming into anger. "You went behind our backs? You're supposed to be helping us, not whatever. This is..." "Helping you?" I echoed, genuine bewilderment in my voice. "Is that what you think you've been asking for? Help? You lied to me about renovations that didn't exist. You manipulated me into letting you move in. You relegated me to the attic of my own home. You stole from my bank accounts. You plotted to force me into a retirement home so you could take my house. And now you're upset that I went behind your backs?" Nico stepped forward, his lawyer persona taking over as he attempted to regain control of the situation. "Look, Meredith, I understand you're upset. We should have been more transparent about our financial situation, but buying our mortgage, that's an extreme reaction. We can work this out like family." "Family," I repeated, the word hollow in my mouth. "You two have a very strange definition of family. In my experience, family doesn't treat each other as means to an end." Zara's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, please. We were desperate. We made mistakes. But we're still your family. Your only family." For a moment, I felt the familiar tug of maternal obligation, the instinct to soothe, to forgive, to sacrifice my own well-being for my child's. It was a reflex so deeply ingrained that even now, faced with their blatant betrayal, I felt its pull. But then I remembered the attic. The cold nights spent huddled under insufficient blankets. The isolation. The way they spoke about me when they thought I couldn't hear. The old woman. Dead weight. A means to an end. I remembered my missing wedding silver and the unauthorized withdrawals from my account. I remembered the dog-eared brochures for Sunset Haven and the eager plans to ship me off like unwanted furniture. "No," I said finally, my voice stronger than it had been in months. "Not anymore. You stopped being family the moment you decided I was nothing more than an obstacle to your financial salvation." "So what now?" Nico demanded, desperation edging into his tone. "You're going to throw us out? Force us back to a house we can't afford?" "That's entirely up to you," I replied. "As the mortgage holder, I'm offering terms. You can return to your home in Oakridge Heights and resume payments. To me, not the bank. The interest rate will remain the same. Any missed payments will be added to the principal. Or you can choose to walk away, in which case, I'll take possession of the property and sell it to recoup my investment." "And if we stay here?" Zara challenged, crossing her arms defensively. That's not an option, I said quietly. You have until noon tomorrow to remove yourselves and your belongings from my home. Anything left behind will be considered abandoned property. You can't be serious, Zara's voice cracked with disbelief. You're throwing your own daughter out on the street? Over what? A few white lies? Some borrowed money? The audacity of her characterization nearly took my breath away. Borrowed implies intention to return, Zara. And these weren't white lies. They were calculated deceptions designed to deprive me of my home and financial security. We were going to take care of you, she protested, just in a more appropriate setting for your age. My age, I repeated slowly. I'm 63, Zara, not 93. I'm in perfect health, mentally sharp, and fully capable of living independently, as I've been doing since your father died 15 years ago. The only appropriate setting for me is the home I've maintained and paid for through decades of hard work. Nico, sensing the conversation was spiraling beyond recovery, placed a restraining hand on Zara's arm. Let's take a step back here. We're all upset. Maybe we should sleep on this and discuss it with clearer heads tomorrow. There's nothing to discuss, I said firmly. My decision is final. You will vacate my home by noon tomorrow. You may return to your house in Oakridge Heights and resume mortgage payments, or you may find alternative arrangements. Those are your only options. Without waiting for their response, I turned and climbed the stairs to my attic room, for what I hoped would be the last night. Behind me, I heard the harsh whispers of their argument begin, but I didn't linger to eavesdrop. I'd heard enough of their true feelings to last a lifetime. In my small attic space, I sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had transpired. The daughter I had raised, loved, sacrificed for. She had been planning my disposal as casually as one might plan to upgrade an appliance. The realization brought a wave of grief so profound it momentarily took my breath away. I picked up the framed photograph of Preston from my nightstand, tracing his face with my fingertip. What did we do wrong? I whispered to his smiling image. Where did we lose her? No answer came, of course, just the distant sounds of Zara and Nico's heated argument filtering up through the floorboards. I set the photograph down and began to pack what few belongings remained with me in the attic. Tomorrow would be a new beginning, one way or another. Sleep eluded me that night. Every creak of the house, every muffled voice from below kept me alert and wary. Around 2 a.m, I heard footsteps on the stairs leading to the attic. I sat up, heart pounding, as a gentle knock sounded on my door. Mom? Zara's voice, thick with tears. Are you awake? Can we talk? I hesitated, torn between maternal instinct and self-preservation. Finally, I rose and opened the door a few inches, keeping the chain lock engaged, a precaution I'd installed my third night in the attic after finding my jewelry box had been disturbed. Zara stood in the dim hallway, her face streaked with tears, looking younger and more vulnerable than she had in years. For a moment, I saw echoes of the little girl who had once crawled into my bed during thunderstorms, seeking comfort and protection. It's very late, Zara, I said quietly. I know, I'm sorry, but I couldn't sleep. She wiped at her cheeks with the back of her hand. Mom, please, we need to talk about this. I don't want it to end this way. How did you expect it to end? I asked, genuinely curious. When you were planning to move me to Sunset Haven and take my house, how did you see that playing out? She had the grace to look ashamed. It wasn't like that. Not completely. We were desperate, yes, but we would have taken care of you. From a distance, I noted. In a facility that would have drained my resources while you lived in my home. We made mistakes, she admitted, her voice breaking. Big ones. But please, Mom, don't throw away 35 years of mother-daughter relationship over this. We can fix this. Give us another chance. The plea tugged at my heart. But I had given chances before. So many chances. Every time money disappeared from my wallet. Every time a promised visit was canceled at the last minute. Every time my boundaries were ignored and my generosity taken for granted. I had forgiven, made excuses, convinced myself that next time would be different. There would be no next time. "I'm not throwing away our relationship, Zara," I said gently. "You did that when you decided I was nothing more than a means to an end. When you took my home, my dignity, and my trust. Some things once broken can't be repaired." Her face crumpled. "So that's it? You're just cutting me off? Your only child?" "I'm setting boundaries," I corrected. "Something I should have done long ago. You're an adult, Zara. Your choices have consequences. This is one of them." She stared at me for a long moment, her expression shifting from hurt to something harder, colder. "You'll regret this. When you're old and alone and have no one to help you, you'll remember this moment and wish you'd made a different choice." The threat was so nakedly manipulative that it almost made me laugh. This was the true Zara, the one who had schemed to take my home, who had dismissed me as dead weight, who saw my value only in what I could provide her. "I'd rather be alone than be used," I said simply, and closed the door. I listened as her footsteps retreated down the stairs, then sank onto the edge of my bed, trembling slightly. There was no satisfaction in this confrontation, no sense of victory or vindication, only a profound sadness for what had been lost, or perhaps had, never truly existed except in my hopeful imagination. Morning came with the sounds of activity below, doors opening and closing, muffled voices, the thud of items being moved. I dressed carefully in clothes I had selected the night before, a simple blouse and slacks that represented neither surrender nor confrontation. This was not a day for battle armor or for weakness. When I descended the stairs at precisely 8 a.m., I found the living room in disarray. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, furniture had been shifted, and items I hadn't seen in months had reappeared from whatever hiding places they had been relegated to. Zara and Nico moved through the chaos like automatons, their faces set in identical masks of resentful compliance. "Good morning," I said, making my way to the kitchen to start coffee. Neither responded, though Nico shot me a dark look before disappearing into what had once been my bedroom. I prepared my coffee in silence, taking comfort in the familiar ritual. As the rich aroma filled the kitchen, I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. This was not how I had imagined my relationship with my daughter would evolve. In my dreams, we would have grown closer as she matured, becoming friends as well as family. I had envisioned holidays filled with laughter, shared confidences over cups of tea, the joy of watching her build a life filled with integrity and purpose. Instead, here we were, strangers occupying the same space, bound by blood, but separated by choices that could not be undone. My reverie was interrupted by Zara's voice, sharp with accusation. "Where's my grandmother's china set?" I turned to find her standing in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed defensively. "In the cabinet where it's always been," I replied calmly. "Though it's my mother's china, not yours." "You promised it to me," she insisted. "Years ago, you said I could have it when I got my own place." I nodded slowly. "I did, and you've had your own place for 4 years now. Yet you never took it, never showed any interest in it until this moment." "Because we were living in an apartment before the Victorian," she argued. "There wasn't space for a full china set. And now?" She faltered slightly. "Now I want what's mine." "It isn't yours, Zara," I said gently. "It was a conditional gift, one I'm rescinding, in light of recent events. The china stays with me." Her face flushed with anger. "You can't do that. You can't just take back things you promised me." "Actually, I can," I replied. just as you can't simply take my home because it would be convenient for you. We don't always get what we want, Zara, something you seem to have difficulty understanding. For a moment, I thought she might lash out physically. Her hands clenched at her sides, her body rigid with fury. Instead, she spun on her heel and stalked back to the living room, where I heard her mutter to Nico, "She's being impossible. Just take what we need." The implication was clear, and I made a mental note to check my valuables before they departed. It seemed the lessons of respect and boundaries had yet to take root. The next few hours passed in tense silence as they continued packing. I neither helped nor hindered, simply maintained a watchful presence as my home was gradually restored to me. When Nico attempted to remove a painting Preston had purchased on our 20th anniversary, a piece that had always hung in our bedroom, I stepped forward wordlessly and took it from his hands, replacing it on the wall without comment. He didn't challenge me. At 11:45 a.m., 15 minutes before my deadline, they had filled Nico's SUV with boxes and bags of their belongings. What they couldn't fit would presumably be collected later, though I had no intention of making that easy. For them, Zara stood in the entryway, keys in hand, her expression a complex mixture of anger, hurt, and something that might have been regret if I were feeling generous in my interpretation. "So this is really it," she said, her voice tight. "You're choosing your house over your daughter." "No, Zara," I corrected gently. "I'm choosing self-respect over exploitation. There's a significant difference." Nico appeared behind her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Let's go. We can send for the rest of our things later." "Actually," I interjected, "anything left behind?" "Afternoon today will be donated to the women's shelter on Maple Street. They're always in need of household items for families starting over." His eyes narrowed. "Some of those things are expensive. Designer pieces." "Then I suggest you take them now," I replied evenly. Zara looked around the entryway one last time, her gaze lingering on the family photographs that lined the wall. Images of happier times that now seemed like scenes from another life entirely. "You'll regret this," she said, echoing her words from the night before. "When you need us, we won't be there." The threat might have wounded me once. Now, it merely highlighted the transactional nature of what our relationship had become. "You haven't been there for me in years, Zara," I said softly. "The only difference now is that I've stopped pretending otherwise." Without another word, she turned and walked out the door, Nico following close behind. I watched from the window as they loaded into the SUV, neither looking back as they pulled away from the curb and disappeared down the street. And just like that, I was alone in my home for the first time in almost 5 months. The silence that followed their departure was profound. Not the tense, wary quiet of recent weeks, but a deep, peaceful stillness that wrapped around me like a familiar blanket. I moved through the rooms slowly, reacquainting myself with my space, noting what had been changed, what had been taken, what had been left behind. In the master bedroom, my bedroom, I stripped the linens from the bed immediately, unwilling to sleep on sheets that carried their scent. I opened windows throughout the house, letting fresh air sweep away the lingering presence of betrayal and disappointment. As I worked, I allowed myself to fully feel the complex emotions I had been holding at bay. Grief for the daughter I had lost, or perhaps never truly had. Anger at the depth of their deception. Relief at reclaiming my space and autonomy. And, beneath it all, a profound sadness that family, something that should be a source of comfort and security, had become a battlefield where I had to defend my very existence. By evening, I had reclaimed the essential spaces of my home: bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, living room. The rest would wait for another day. I was exhausted, emotionally and physically drained by the confrontation and its aftermath. As I prepared, a simple dinner, the first meal in months I had cooked solely for my own enjoyment, my phone rang. The screen displayed a name I hadn't seen in weeks: Eleanor Walsh, my oldest friend, who had gradually stopped calling after being repeatedly told I was too busy to come to the phone. Another of Zara and Nico's tactics to isolate me. "Eleanor?" I answered, my voice warm with genuine pleasure. "It's been too long." "Meredith," she replied, concern evident in her tone. "Are you all right? I've been worried sick. You haven't answered calls or texts in weeks, and when I stopped by last month, Zara said you were resting and couldn't be disturbed." The revelation didn't surprise me, but it stung nonetheless. "I'm fine now," I assured her. "But I have quite a story to tell you, if you have time to listen." "For you?" "Always. Do you want company? I could bring over that red blend you like and those cheese straws from Henrietta's bakery." The offer of simple friendship, genuine, unconditional connection, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "I'd like that very much," I said, my voice slightly husky with emotion. An hour later, Eleanor arrived at my door, wine and cheese straws in hand, her familiar smile a balm to my wounded spirit. As we settled in the living room, now restored to some semblance of its former comfort, I began to share the full story of what had transpired in the months of my isolation. Eleanor listened with growing horror, her expressive face registering shock, anger, and dismay as I described Zara and Nico's campaign to take my home and dispose of me in a senior living facility. "Those ungrateful, manipulative—" She broke off, too furious to continue. "And to think I felt guilty for not trying harder to see you. I should have known something was wrong when they kept making excuses." "You couldn't have known," I assured her. "They were very careful. Very convincing." "But to send you to the attic!" she exclaimed, outrage coloring her voice. "In your own home. It's like something out of a Victorian novel. The inconvenient relative locked away in the attic." The comparison was apt enough to make me smile ruefully. At least they didn't claim I was insane. Though I suspect that might have been their next move if the Sunset Haven plan had fallen through. Eleanor reached across the sofa to clasp my hand tightly. "I'm so sorry, Meredith. No one should have to endure that kind of betrayal, especially not from their own child." "The worst part," I admitted quietly, "is that I still love her. Despite everything. Is that pathetic?" "It's human," Eleanor said gently. "She's your daughter. Of course you love her. That doesn't mean you have to accept her behavior or allow her back into your life on the same terms as before." I nodded, grateful for her understanding. "I've set boundaries now, clear ones, including taking ownership of their mortgage." At this revelation, Eleanor's eyes widened, then a slow smile spread across her face. "Meredith Harlow, you brilliant woman. You outplayed them at their own game." "It wasn't about winning," I clarified. "It was about protecting myself and holding them accountable. They need to understand that actions have consequences." "And now they're back in their own house, paying you mortgage payments?" She shook, her head in amazement. "There's a certain poetic justice to that arrangement." "If they choose to stay," I said, "they have options. Not good ones, perhaps, but options nonetheless." We talked late into the evening, the familiar rhythm of conversation with a trusted friend helping to restore my sense of normalcy. When Eleanor finally left, promising to return the next day to help me continue reclaiming my space, I felt more centered than I had in months. That night, in my own bed with fresh linens, I slept deeply and dreamlessly for the first time since Zara and Nico had invaded my home. Whatever tomorrow might bring, tonight I was safe, secure, and, most importantly, free from the constant vigilance and tension that had characterized my existence under their roof. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect spring day that seemed to mirror my newfound sense of liberation. I rose early, prepared coffee, and sat on my back, porch watching the sun rise over my garden, neglected now, but still mine to cultivate as I chose. At precisely 9:00 a.m., my phone rang. The screen displayed a number I didn't recognize, but something told me to answer rather than let it go to voicemail. Hello, Meredith Harlow speaking. Ms. Harlow, this is Marcus Jennings from Meridian. Realty, a smooth male voice replied. I'm calling regarding the property at 1847 Oakridge Heights Boulevard. Nico's racquetball partner, the realtor who worked with Sunset Haven to facilitate senior transitions. My guard immediately went up. Yes, Mr. Jennings. What about it? I understand you recently assumed ownership of the mortgage on that property, he continued, a note of careful neutrality in his tone. I'm calling to inquire whether you might be interested in listing it for sale. The market in Oakridge Heights is quite strong at the moment. So that was their play. Attempt to get me to sell the Victorian, probably so they could collect some portion of the proceeds. A clever move, if transparent. I'm not interested in selling at this time, Mr. Jennings, I replied calmly, but thank you for your interest. Perhaps I could present some comparable sales figures, he persisted. The property could command a significant price, well above what you paid for the mortgage. I'm well aware of the property's value, I said, my voice cooling slightly. As I said, I'm not interested in selling. A pause, then. May I ask what your intentions are for the property? My clients... Your clients being my daughter and son-in-law? I interrupted. Another pause, longer this time. Yes, they expressed interest in resolving this situation amicably. There's nothing to resolve, Mr. Jennings. The situation is quite straightforward. I own the mortgage on the property. They may continue living there and making payments to me, or they may vacate and forfeit their equity. Those are the only options available. Ms. Harlow, he began again, his tone shifting to something more persuasive. I understand there's been some family discord. Perhaps a third-party mediator could help facilitate a resolution that satisfies everyone's needs. My needs are already satisfied, I replied simply. I have my home back and I have security. What Zara and Nico do with their lives now is entirely up to them. But surely as a mother... Mr. Jennings, I cut him off firmly. My relationship with my daughter is not your concern, nor is it relevant to the financial arrangement regarding the property. Please convey to your clients that my terms remain unchanged. Good day. I ended the call before he could respond, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and resolve. They were still trying to manipulate the situation, still seeking advantage, rather than accepting responsibility. Some things, it seemed, would never change. Later that afternoon, as Eleanor and I sorted through the remaining items Zara and Nico had left behind, my doorbell rang. I exchanged a wary glance with Eleanor before moving to answer it, half expecting to find Zara or Nico making another attempt to sway me. Instead, I found Lawrence Kaplan standing on my porch, briefcase in hand, his bow tie slightly askew as always. Lawrence, I greeted him with genuine pleasure. This is unexpected. Come in. He stepped inside, nodding a greeting to Eleanor, whom he knew from various community functions over the years. I apologize for dropping by unannounced, Meredith, but I thought you should see these documents immediately. He patted his briefcase with significance. Of course, I gestured toward the dining room. We can talk in there. Once seated at the table, Lawrence withdrew several official-looking papers from his briefcase and laid them out methodically. I received these this morning via courier from Wexler & Associates, the firm where Nico's colleague in elder law practices. I picked up the top document, scanning it quickly, my stomach tightening as I absorbed the legal language. They're filing for guardianship? Over me? Lawrence nodded grimly. They're alleging diminished capacity and financial vulnerability, claiming, you're being manipulated and are unable to make sound decisions regarding your property and finances. Eleanor, who had followed us into the dining room, made a sound of outrage. That's absurd. You're sharper than people half your age. It is absurd, Lawrence agreed, and frankly, offensive. But it's also a strategy, and not an uncommon one. Unfortunately, they're attempting to gain legal control over your assets by claiming you're mentally unfit. I set the document down carefully, my hands steadied despite the anger building inside me. On what grounds? What evidence could they possibly have? The petition cites erratic financial decisions, specifically your purchase of their mortgage and your decision to, quote, evict family members dependent on your support. They're framing your actions as signs of cognitive decline rather than as rational responses to their exploitation. Eleanor snorted derisively. Cognitive decline? You outmaneuvered them at every turn. I appreciated her outrage, but my mind was already racing ahead to implications and countermoves. What's the likely outcome here, Lawrence? Should I be worried? He adjusted his glasses thoughtfully. Concerned, yes. Worried, no. These petitions require substantial evidence to succeed, especially when the subject is actively opposing them. They've requested a psychological evaluation, which is standard procedure. If granted, you'd be assessed by a court-appointed evaluator. And if I refuse, that would potentially strengthen their case, he admitted. The court might interpret refusal as an indication that you have something to hide. I drummed my fingers on the table, thinking. So I submit to an evaluation that proves I'm perfectly competent, and the petition is dismissed. Ideally, yes, but these cases can become messy. Family members sometimes bring in their own experts with contradicting opinions. Proceedings can drag on for months, even years, in some cases, during which time my assets could be frozen, my decision-making power limited. The strategic brilliance of their move wasn't lost on me, despite its moral bankruptcy. They had found a way to potentially regain control without addressing their own actions. Lawrence nodded grimly. Possibly, though we would fight any temporary orders vigorously. But Meredith, there's something else you should know. He slid another document across the table. This was included with the petition. It was a medical assessment from Dr. Gregory Winters, a psychiatrist I had never met, dated just 3 weeks earlier. It stated that based on observations and information provided by family members, I displayed signs of early cognitive decline consistent with beginning stage dementia, including paranoia, confusion about financial matters, and hostility toward caregivers. This is a fabrication, I said quietly, ice in my veins. I've never met this doctor. I suspected as much, Lawrence replied, which is why I've already filed a complaint with the medical board and a motion to dismiss this petition on grounds of fraudulent evidence. But Meredith, this shows how far they're willing to go. I sat back in my chair, absorbing the implications. My own daughter was willing to have me declared mentally incompetent, to strip me of my autonomy and dignity, rather than accept the consequences of her actions. The betrayal cut deeper than I had thought possible, opening wounds I had believed were already at their most painful. Eleanor reached across the table and squeezed my hand. What do you need from me? Character witness? I'll tell any court exactly what I think of this nonsense. Thank you, I said, grateful for her unwavering support. But I think this requires a more decisive approach. I turned to Lawrence. What would happen if I sold my house? Right now, before any temporary orders could be issued. Lawrence's eyebrows rose slightly. You're considering moving? I'm considering removing the primary target, I clarified. If I no longer own this house, if I've converted it to liquid assets that can be protected through other means, their primary motivation disappears. It could work, Lawrence said slowly. Though they might argue the sale itself is evidence of erratic behavior. Not if there's a clear rational purpose behind it, I countered, and not if the proceeds are managed in a way that demonstrates financial competence. Eleanor looked at me with concern. But Meredith, this is your home. You love this house. I do, I acknowledged, but I'm beginning to think my attachment to it has become a vulnerability. Maybe it's time for a fresh start somewhere they can't find me so easily. We talked for another hour, exploring options and strategies. By the time Lawrence left, we had developed a two-pronged approach. He would fight the guardianship petition through legal channels, while I would begin preparing my home for a potential quick sale if necessary. As Eleanor helped me clear away the teacups we had used during our strategy session, she asked the question I had been avoiding. What about their mortgage? The Victorian? I sighed, leaning against the kitchen counter. That's the complicated part. If I sell this house and move, I'll need to decide whether to keep their mortgage as an investment or sell it to another lender. And if you sell it? Then they'd be making payments to someone else, someone who might not be as understanding about late payments or financial hardships. The implication hung in the air between us. They don't deserve your consideration, Eleanor said firmly. Not after this. It's not about what they deserve, I replied softly. It's about who I am, who I choose to be in response to their actions. That night, after Eleanor had gone home with promises to return the next day, I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by the accumulated memories of decades. Family photographs that now seemed like artifacts from a fiction. Books Preston and I had read together. The throw blanket Zara had given me for Christmas 3 years ago. One of the last gestures that had seemed genuinely thoughtful before the mask had slipped completely. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Zara's contact information, my thumb hovering over the call button. Part of me, the mother who had held her through childhood fevers and teenage heartbreaks, wanted to reach out one more time to find some path to reconciliation that wouldn't require surrender of my dignity or security. But the more rational part of me recognized that any overture would be interpreted as weakness, as an opening to exploit. They had made their position clear with the guardianship petition. There would be no good faith negotiations, no mutual respect, no recognition of the harm they had caused. I set the phone down without calling. The following morning brought sunshine and a sense of purpose. I had slept surprisingly well, perhaps because a decision had crystallized in my mind during those quiet hours of reflection. I would sell the house, regardless of the outcome of the guardianship petition. Not out of fear or retreat, but as a positive step toward a new chapter of life, one defined by my choices rather than by the manipulations of others. I called Lawrence to inform him of my decision, then contacted a realtor I had known for years, someone with no connection to Zara, Nico, or Marcus Jennings. By noon, I had scheduled an appraisal and listing appointment for the following day. By evening, I had begun the bittersweet process of sorting through 30 years of accumulated possessions, deciding what to keep, what to sell, what to donate. Eleanor arrived as promised, bringing reinforcements in the form of 2 other friends. From our book club, Daphne and Gloria, women who had once been regular visitors to my home before Zara and Nico's campaign of isolation had taken effect. Their shock at learning what had transpired quickly gave way to indignation, then to practical support as they helped me sort through closets and cabinets. I found another box of Zara's childhood things, Daphne called from the guest room closet. Keep or donate? I considered the question, feeling the familiar pang of maternal sentiment warring with my new resolve. Set it aside, I decided. I'll have Lawrence send her a formal notice that she can collect any remaining personal items by a specific date, after which they'll be considered abandoned. Gloria, who was helping me sort kitchen items, paused with a serving platter in her hands. Are you sure you want to sell? You could rent the house instead. Keep the asset, but move somewhere they don't know about. I've considered that, I admitted. But being a landlord comes with its own complications. And honestly, I think I'm ready for a completely fresh start. Any ideas where you might go? Eleanor asked, emerging from the dining room with a stack of linens. Actually, yes. The idea had come to me during the night, emerging fully formed, as if it had been waiting patiently for recognition. Coast Haven. My friends exchanged surprised glances. Coast Haven was a small artists' community about 90 minutes north, a place Preston and I had discovered on a weekend drive years ago and had often talked about retiring to someday. After his death, I had occasionally visited for inspiration, for my botanical illustrations, always feeling a sense of peace in its quiet streets and ocean views. "It's perfect," Eleanor said after a moment of consideration. "Far enough to discourage casual visits, but close enough that your real friends can still see you regularly." Daphne nodded enthusiastically. "And the art community there is wonderful. You could expand your illustration work, maybe even teach workshops." The idea took stronger root with each passing moment. Not a retreat, but an advance toward something I had wanted, but had set aside. In the aftermath of Preston's death, a community where creativity was valued, where I might find new purpose and connection. By the end of the day, surrounded by boxes and sorting piles, I felt lighter than I had in months, years perhaps. The house that had become a battleground was being transformed back into what it had always been meant to be, a vessel for memories, not a prison of obligation. The next morning, the realtor arrived promptly at 9. Vivian Holcomb was in her late 50s, brisk and professional with an encyclopedic knowledge of the local market. She walked through each room making notes, occasionally asking questions about renovations or maintenance history. In the kitchen, as she examined the updated appliances Zara and Nico had insisted on installing, using my credit card, I later discovered. She paused. "The market is exceptionally strong right now, Meredith. Inventory is low and buyers are competitive. I think we could list significantly higher than you might expect." "How soon could it be on the market? With professional photos and staging? A week, perhaps less if we push." She studied my face. "You're in a hurry." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Let's say I'm motivated." She nodded, understanding without requiring further explanation. "I have a photographer who can be here tomorrow. If you can have the house ready for staging by Friday, we could list by Monday." "I'll be ready," I promised. After she left, I continued the work of sorting and packing with renewed energy. The timeline was ambitious but achievable, especially with the help of my friends who had promised to return for what Gloria was now calling Operation Fresh Start. Around noon, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, wary of another contact from Zara or Nico's camp, but something prompted me to answer. "Hello? Ms. Harlow, this is Detective Sarah Emerson with the Willowbrook Police Department. Do you have a moment to talk?" My heart skipped a beat. "Of course, Detective. Is something wrong?" "I'm calling regarding a report that was filed this morning. A Marcus Jennings stated that he's concerned about your welfare, claims you may be being taken advantage of by individuals who have isolated you from family members trying to assist you." The audacity was breathtaking. They had escalated from legal maneuvers to involving law enforcement. "I see," I said carefully. "And did Mr. Jennings mention that he's a business associate of my son-in-law, or that they're currently the subjects of a complaint I've filed regarding elder financial abuse?" A pause. "No, he didn't mention those details." "Detective Emerson, I appreciate the department's concern, but I assure you I'm perfectly fine. In fact, I have 3 friends here with me right now helping me prepare for a house sale. You're welcome to stop by and verify my well-being in person if that would put the matter to rest." Another pause, shorter this time. "That won't be necessary, Ms. Harlow, but I do need to follow up on reports like this as a matter of procedure. Would it be possible for you to come to the station sometime this week to make a statement? That would allow us to close the file." "Of course. Would tomorrow afternoon work? Around 3? "That would be fine. Thank you for your cooperation, Ms. Harlow." After ending the call, I immediately phoned Lawrence to update him on this latest development. His reaction was one of controlled anger. "This is escalation," he said grimly. "They're attempting to create a paper trail of concerns about your mental state to support their guardianship petition. We need to counter with documentation of our own." He advised me to bring Eleanor to the police station as a witness, to have my doctor write a current letter attesting to my mental competence, and to begin recording all communications from Zara, Nico, or anyone acting on their behalf. "And Meredith," he added before hanging up, "be careful. If they're willing to go this far, there's no telling what else they might attempt." The warning sent a chill through me. Not because I feared physical harm from Zara or Nico, they were too calculating for that kind of direct action, but because I realized how completely our relationship had devolved from family bonds to tactical warfare. That evening, as I continued sorting through the master bedroom, I came across a small velvet jewelry box tucked in the back of my dresser drawer. Inside was the diamond pendant Preston had given me on our last anniversary before his diagnosis, a simple teardrop stone on a platinum chain that caught the light in mesmerizing ways. I had worn it constantly during his illness, drawing strength from its presence. After his death, it had been too painful to continue wearing, too raw a reminder of what I had lost. I had carefully tucked it away, promising myself I would wear it again when the grief had softened enough to allow for celebration of our life together, rather than mourning of its end. Somehow, in the chaos and demands of moving forward alone, raising Zara through her turbulent college years, building my illustration business, the pendant had remained in its velvet nest, forgotten. I lifted it from the box, watching as it caught, the evening light streaming through the window. Without hesitation, I fastened it around my neck, feeling its familiar weight settle against my skin. "I think it's time, Preston," I said softly to the empty room. "Time to remember the joy, not just the loss." The next day brought a flurry of activity. The real estate photographer arrived early, capturing images of each room from multiple angles. Eleanor accompanied me to the police station, where Detective Emerson took my statement regarding the situation with Zara and Nico, listening with increasing concern as I detailed their actions over the past months. "Ms. Harlow, this sounds like a clear case of attempted financial exploitation," she said when I had finished. "Would you like to file formal charges?" The question gave me pause. Filing criminal charges would irrevocably transform the conflict, with Zara from a family dispute to a legal matter with potentially serious consequences for her and Nico. "Not at this time," I said finally. "I've taken steps to protect myself and my assets. If the situation escalates further, I may reconsider." Detective Emerson nodded, understanding the complexity of family dynamics even in situations of abuse or exploitation. "That's your right. But please know, the option remains available should circumstances change." She provided me with resources for elder protection services and assured me that Mr. Jennings's report would be noted as unfounded in their records. As Eleanor and I left the police station, I felt both relieved and saddened. Relieved that law enforcement now had an accurate record of events, saddened that such measures had become necessary in dealing with my own daughter. "You could have pressed charges," Eleanor said as we drove back to my house. "No one would have blamed you." "I know," I replied softly, "but I'm not ready to cross that line. Not yet. Maybe not ever." She glanced at me, concern evident in her expression. "Just promise me you won't let misplaced maternal loyalty override your safety or well-being. They've shown they're willing to go to extraordinary lengths to get what they want." "I promise," I assured her, knowing she was right. There was a difference between compassion and foolishness, between leaving a door open to future reconciliation and leaving myself vulnerable to further exploitation. Back at the house, I found a voicemail from Vivian, the realtor. The photographer's Images had turned out beautifully, and she had already received inquiries from several agents with potential buyers based solely on the description she had provided to colleagues. If I was amenable, she wanted to schedule a private showing for a particularly motivated buyer the following day, before the official listing even went live. I returned her call immediately, agreeing to the showing. The momentum of change was building, carrying me forward with a sense of purpose and possibility that I hadn't experienced in far too long. That night, as I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with a text message notification. I checked the screen with some trepidation, half expecting another manipulative overture from Zara or a thinly veiled threat from Nico. Instead, I found a message from a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Harlow, this is Leonard Chen from Coast Haven Arts Collective. Your friend Eleanor Walsh suggested I contact you. We're looking for someone to teach botanical illustration workshops this summer, and she mentioned you might be relocating to our area. I'd love to discuss the possibility if you're interested. I stared at the message, a smile slowly spreading across my face. Eleanor, bless her, had already begun building bridges to my new life, opening doors before I had even fully committed to walking through them. With fingers that trembled slightly with excitement rather than fear, I typed a reply. Mr. Chen, thank you for reaching out. I would indeed be interested in discussing this opportunity. I'm planning to visit Coast Haven next week to look at potential homes. Perhaps we could meet then? His response came almost immediately. That would be perfect. Looking forward to... Tao. I set the phone on my nightstand, feeling a sense of alignment that had been missing for too long. The house sale, the move to Coast Haven, the potential for new professional opportunities, all were falling into place with a synchronicity. That felt almost magical after months of struggle and conflict. Tomorrow would bring the first potential buyer, another step toward freedom from the past and opening to the future. Whatever Zara and Nico might attempt next, I was moving forward. Not running away, but running toward a life reimagined on my own terms. The following morning, I woke early, driven by a combination of anticipation and practical necessity. The house needed to be immaculate for the showing scheduled for 11 o'clock. I spent the early hours tidying, arranging fresh flowers in strategic locations, and opening windows to allow spring breezes to freshen rooms that had felt stifling for too long. At 10:30, Vivian arrived to prepare for the showing, moving through each room with a professional eye, making minor adjustments to furniture placement and lighting. The buyers are a couple in their 40s, both physicians moving here from Seattle for positions at Willowbrook Memorial. They're looking for a family home in an established neighborhood, and they're prepared to act quickly. Perfect, I said, gathering my purse and keys. Sellers typically left during showings to allow buyers to explore and discuss freely. I'll call you as soon as they leave, Vivian promised. If they're interested, and I suspect they will be, we could have an offer by this evening. The speed of developments was dizzying but exhilarating. As I drove away from my home, I felt none of the expected nostalgia or regret, only a buoyant sense of forward motion, of obstacles transforming into pathways. I decided to use the time during the showing to visit Coastal Community Bank and speak with Marlene Chen about the status of Zara and Nico's mortgage. I needed to determine whether to maintain it as an investment or sell it to another lender as part of my financial reorganization. Marlene greeted me warmly when I arrived, ushering me into her office overlooking the harbor. Meredith, how are you? I've been meaning to call you. We received some interesting communication regarding the Oakridge Heights property. My guard immediately went up. What kind of communication? An offer to purchase the mortgage, she said, opening a folder on her desk. From a corporate entity called Nexus Holdings. They're offering to buy the loan at face value. No discount, despite the history of payment issues. I frowned, puzzled by this development. That's unusual, isn't it? Most mortgage purchasers look for discounted notes. Very unusual, Marlene confirmed. It raised red flags immediately. We did some research on Nexus Holdings. It's a recently formed LLC with minimal public information available. However, she slid a document across the desk to me. We did find this in the corporate registration documents. The paper listed the managing members of Nexus Holdings LLC. The primary name was one I didn't recognize, but listed as a secondary member was a familiar name, Marcus Jennings. Nico's racquetball partner, I murmured. The realtor. You know him? Marlene asked, eyebrows raised. I know of him, I clarified. He's connected to my son-in-law. This is interesting. Interesting was an understatement. It was clearly another attempt to regain control by purchasing the mortgage from me. They would eliminate my financial leverage over Zara and Nico's housing situation. The question was, where had they found the resources for such a move? From what I had uncovered, they were deeply in debt with minimal liquid assets. I assume you're not interested in selling the mortgage? Marlene asked. Definitely not to Nexus Holdings, I confirmed, though I am considering my options as part of a larger financial restructuring. We spent the next hour discussing various scenarios, keeping the mortgage as an investment property, selling it to a conventional lender, or potentially converting it to a different type of asset. By the time I left the bank, I had a clearer understanding of my options, though no firm decision had been made. As I returned to my car, my phone rang, Vivian calling with news from the showing. They loved it, she announced without preamble. They're preparing an offer right now. Full asking price, minimal contingencies, and, this is the truly extraordinary part, they're willing to close in 2 weeks if you can accommodate that timeline. My breath caught. 2 weeks? That's incredibly fast. They're motivated. The husband starts at the hospital next month, and they're currently in temporary housing. I told them about your interest in a quick sale, and they're eager to accommodate if it means securing the property. Tell them yes, I said without hesitation. I can be ready in 2 weeks. As I ended the call, a text message notification appeared on my screen. Leonard Chen from Coast Haven confirming our meeting for the following Tuesday. Things were moving faster than I had anticipated, but rather than feeling overwhelmed, I felt exhilarated. I called Eleanor to share the news, then Lawrence to ensure all legal aspects of the accelerated timeline could be accommodated. Both were supportive and practical in their responses, offering assistance with packing, reviewing documents, and managing the transition. By the time I returned home, Vivian had sent over the formal offer for my review, exactly as she had described, with terms that could not have been more favorable if I had drafted them myself. I signed immediately, setting in motion the final countdown to my liberation. That evening, as I sat on my back porch watching the sunset, a daily ritual I had maintained whenever possible throughout the tumultuous months of Zara and Nico's occupation, my phone rang once more. Zara's name appeared on the screen. I hesitated only briefly before answering. Hello, Zara. Mom. Her voice was tightly controlled, with an undercurrent of fury she wasn't quite managing to disguise. What do you think you're doing? You'll need to be more specific, I replied calmly. Don't play games. Marcus just called. You're selling the house? Without even discussing it with us? The presumption was so breathtaking I almost laughed. I wasn't aware I needed your permission to sell my own property, Zara. We had an agreement, she hissed. You were going to transfer the deed to us. No, I corrected gently. You had a plan. I never agreed to it. In fact, I explicitly rejected it when I asked you to leave. This is insane, she spat. You're acting out of spite. You'd rather sell to strangers than help your own daughter? This isn't about spite, Zara. It's about making choices that support my well-being and future security. Something you and Nico showed remarkably little concern for when you were plotting to ship me off to Sunset Haven. She fell silent for a moment, then changed tactics, her voice softening to the manipulative sweetness I had come to recognize all too well. Mom, please, we can work this out. We've all made mistakes, said things we didn't mean. But we're family. Doesn't that count? For anything? Family, I repeated thoughtfully. You know, I've been thinking a lot about that word lately. What it means, what it doesn't mean. And I've concluded that family isn't about blood or obligation or what you can extract from someone. It's about mutual respect, support, and genuine care. By that definition, Zara, we stopped being family some time ago, and it wasn't my choice. So that's it? Her voice hardened again. You're just cutting us off? Throwing away 35 years because of one bad patch? This wasn't one bad patch, Zara. This was a sustained campaign to take everything I have, my home, my autonomy, my dignity. And it hasn't stopped, has it? The guardianship petition, the false police report, the attempt to buy your mortgage through a shell company. These aren't the actions of someone who wants reconciliation. They're the actions of someone who sees me as nothing more than an obstacle to their financial security. Silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken truths. The sale closes in 2 weeks, I continued when she didn't respond. I've instructed Lawrence to forward any remaining items of yours to the Victorian. I suggest you focus your energy on maintaining payments on that mortgage, as I have no intention of selling it to Nexus Holdings or any other entity associated with you or Nico. You'll regret this, she said finally, echoing her threat from the day they left, the one that had once pierced my heart, but now merely confirmed the wisdom of my decisions. No, Zara, I replied softly. I don't think I will. I ended the call and turned my attention back to the sunset, its amber and purple hues painting the sky in a reminder that endings often contain their own particular beauty. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. With the help of Eleanor, Daphne, and Gloria, I sorted through 30 years of accumulated possessions, making deliberate choices about what would accompany me to my new life and what belonged to the past. The doctors from Seattle had signed all necessary paperwork within 24 hours of making their offer, and the expedited closing process was proceeding smoothly. 5 days after accepting the offer, I drove to Coast Haven for my appointment with Leonard Chen and to look at potential homes in the area. The coastal drive was spectacular, winding roads hugging cliffs that overlooked the Pacific, waves crashing against rocky shores, seabirds wheeling overhead in the clear blue sky. With each mile that carried me north, I felt layers of tension melting away, replaced by a growing sense of possibility. Coast Haven itself was exactly as I remembered, a picturesque community of colorful houses nestled between the mountains and sea, its downtown filled with art galleries, cafes, and small independent shops. The air carried the mingled scents of saltwater, pine, and freshly baked bread from the local bakery. Leonard Chen met me at the Coast Haven Arts Collective, a converted warehouse space now housing studios, classrooms, and a gallery that showcased local artists' work. In his early 60s, with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses, Leonard had an easy manner and infectious enthusiasm for the arts community he had helped build. Eleanor speaks very highly of your work, he said as he showed me around the facility. We've been wanting to add botanical illustration to our workshop offerings for some time, but haven't found the right instructor. I'm flattered, I replied, genuinely touched by the opportunity. I've always enjoyed teaching, though my experience has been limited to community college courses and the occasional weekend workshop. That's perfect, Leonard assured me. Our students range from beginners to experienced artists looking to expand their skills. What matters most is passion for the subject and the ability to communicate that to others. By the end of our meeting, we had sketched out a plan for a summer workshop series, 2 evening classes per week for 6 weeks, with the possibility of expanding the program if interest was strong. The timing couldn't have been more perfect, allowing me a few weeks to settle into my new home before teaching began. After leaving the Arts Collective, I met with a local realtor who had arranged viewings of 3 properties that matched my criteria. The first 2 were lovely but didn't quite feel right, one too large for my needs, the other too far from the town center. The third, however, captured my heart immediately. A small cottage perched on a gentle slope overlooking the bay. It featured a wraparound porch, large windows that flooded the interior with natural light, and, most importantly, a sun-filled room perfect for a home studio. The backyard was modest but well-planted with native species and included a small greenhouse where I could cultivate specimens for my illustrations. "It's been on the market for a while," the realtor explained as we walked through the cozy living room. "The owner passed away last year and her children live out of state. They've just reduced the price, hoping for a quick sale." The synchronicity was striking. Another home awaiting new life, offered at precisely the moment I was ready to begin again. Without hesitation, I made an offer, contingent upon the successful closing of my Willowbrook property, but otherwise straightforward and clean. Driving back to Willowbrook that evening, I felt a profound sense of rightness, as if each piece of my future was falling into place with an ease that confirmed I was moving in the direction my life was meant to take. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was making choices based not on obligation or others' expectations, but on my own desires and well-being. The contrast with the manipulation and constraint I had experienced under Zara and Nico's influence couldn't have been more stark. There, every decision had been weighted with calculation and hidden agendas. Here, there was only clarity and purpose. When I returned home, I found a formal letter from Lawrence had arrived in my absence. The guardianship petition had been dismissed by the court, based on both the fraudulent nature of the medical assessment and the clear evidence I had provided of my cognitive competence and financial acumen. The judge had further ordered Zara and Nico to pay all legal costs associated with the proceedings, a small victory, but a meaningful one. I called Lawrence immediately to thank him for his excellent work. "Don't thank me yet," he cautioned. "They're not likely to give up so easily. The mortgage is still their primary concern, and as long as you hold it, they'll continue looking for ways to neutralize your control." "Let them try," I replied, surprising myself with the calm confidence in my voice. "I'm done being reactive. From now on, I'm 10 steps ahead." And indeed I was. Over the next week, as the closing date for my Willowbrook home approached, I finalized the purchase of the Coast Haven cottage, arranged for the transfer of utilities, scheduled movers, and began saying goodbye to the spaces that had witnessed so much of my life, both the joyful chapters and the painful ones. There was sadness, of course. This had been the home where Preston and I had built our life together, where we had raised Zara, celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, weathered storms both literal and metaphorical. Each room held memories that I would carry with me, regardless of who owned the physical space. But there was also a profound sense of liberation. The house had become a battleground, its walls absorbing the tension and betrayal of recent months. Leaving it behind felt like setting down a heavy burden I hadn't fully acknowledged the weight of until it was lifting. 2 days before closing, as I supervised the movers packing the last of my belongings, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Nico standing on my porch, his expression an unconvincing attempt at contrition. "Meredith," he began, shifting uncomfortably, under my steady gaze. "I was hoping we could talk." "About what exactly?" I asked, making no move to invite him inside. He glanced past me at the moving boxes visible in the entryway. "You're really going through with this? Did you think I wouldn't?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture I had once found charming, but now recognized as calculated, part of the persona he adopted when attempting to manipulate. "Look, things got out of hand. We all made mistakes. But is selling the house and moving away really the answer? What about reconciliation?" "Reconciliation requires acknowledgement of harm and genuine remorse," I pointed out. "I've seen neither from you or Zara." That's not fair, he protested. We're here, aren't we? Trying to make things right. Are you? I raised an eyebrow. Or are you here because your latest attempts to regain control? The guardianship petition, the police, report, the shell company offer on your mortgage have all failed? A flash of anger crossed his face before he could suppress it. You've become so cynical, Meredith. This isn't like you. You have no idea what's like me, Nico, I replied calmly. You never bothered to know me as a person, only as a resource, to be exploited. He shifted tactics, his voice softening. Zara's devastated, you know. Whatever you think of me, she's still your daughter. She grew up in this house, and now you're selling it to strangers without even giving her a chance to… To what? I interrupted. To buy it? With what money? Or perhaps you mean without giving her the chance to take it from me through manipulation and lies. I've given Zara chances her entire life, Nico. What I haven't given her, what I should have introduced much earlier, are consequences for her actions. He stared at me for a long moment, the mask of contrition slipping to reveal the cold calculation beneath. This isn't over, you know. The mortgage is mine, I finished for him, and will remain so unless and until I decide otherwise. You're welcome to refinance with another lender if you can find one willing to take on your credit risk. Otherwise, you'll continue making payments to me according to the terms we established. Without another word, he turned and walked back to his car, where I now noticed Zara waiting in the passenger seat. She didn't look at me as they drove away. I closed the door without regret, returning to the work of closing one chapter of my life and opening another. The closing itself was anticlimactic. Paperwork signed, keys handed over, funds transferred. The young doctors who had purchased my home were clearly excited about beginning their new life there, already discussing renovations and improvements they planned to make. I found myself genuinely happy for them, hoping they would create memories, as meaningful as those I was taking with me. I spent that night at Eleanor's home, surrounded by friends who had arranged a small farewell gathering. There were tears, certainly, but also laughter and a palpable sense of celebration for my new beginning. These women had stood by me through the darkest months, offering practical help and emotional support without judgment or condition. They were, I realized, more family to me than my own daughter had proven to be. We've made plans to visit next month, Daphne announced over dessert. Gloria's sister has a beach house just south of Coast Haven that she's offered for a long weekend. You won't be rid of us that easily. I'm counting on it, I replied, genuinely moved by their commitment to maintaining our connection despite the distance. Early the next morning, I began the drive north to Coast Haven, my car packed with essentials for the first few days in my new home. The moving truck would arrive the following day with the furniture and boxes I had selected to accompany me into this next chapter. As I crested the final hill before Coast Haven came into view, I pulled over at a scenic overlook to take in the panorama of the town, the bay, and the endless horizon of the Pacific. The sun was just beginning to burn away the morning mist, golden light spilling across the water and illuminating the colorful buildings nestled between shore and mountains. Somewhere in that picturesque scene was my cottage, my new home, my sanctuary, my fresh start. And beyond the physical space were new connections waiting to be formed, creative work waiting to be done, experiences waiting to unfold. I touched the diamond pendant at my throat, Preston's gift, now a talisman of strength rather than a reminder of loss. I think you'd approve, I said softly to his memory, of all of it. As I pulled back onto the coastal highway for the final stretch of my journey, my phone rang through the car's speaker system. Unknown number. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, not wanting to risk Zara or Nico intruding on this moment of transition. Instead, I answered, "Hello? Ms. Harlow, this is Vivian Holcomb. I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all, Vivian. What can I do for you?" I just received a rather unusual inquiry about you, she said, her voice carefully neutral. A woman named Zara Patterson called claiming to be your daughter. She was quite insistent about needing your new address for, quote, important family documents that needed to be forwarded immediately. I smiled, unsurprised by this latest attempt. And what did you tell her? That client information is confidential, of course, but I thought you should know she's actively trying to locate you. Thank you for the heads up, Vivian, and for maintaining my privacy. Of course. I wish you all the best in your new home, Ms. Harlow. You've handled a difficult situation with remarkable grace. After ending the call, I continued driving toward Coast Haven, feeling no anger at Zara's predictable attempt to track me down. Only a quiet certainty that I had made the right decision in keeping my new location private. The cottage was even more charming than I remembered. The cleaning service I had arranged had left it spotless, windows gleaming in the late morning sun. I carried my overnight bag and a small box of personal items inside, setting them down in the entryway before walking slowly through each room, mentally placing furniture, planning where art would hang, imagining the space filled with light and life. In the kitchen, I found a welcome basket from the local realtor, fresh bread, cheese, fruit, and a bottle of wine. A handwritten note welcomed me to Coast Haven and invited me to a community potluck the following weekend. I made a simple lunch and carried it out to the porch, settling into a chair overlooking the bay. Birds called from nearby trees, and the distant sound of waves provided a gentle soundtrack to my thoughts. Tomorrow would bring the practical work of unpacking and organizing. Next week would bring the start of my workshop preparations at the Arts Collective. Beyond that stretched a future I was now free to shape according to my own desires and values. As for Zara and Nico, I harbored no illusions that they had accepted defeat. They would likely continue their attempts to locate me, to regain control of the mortgage, to manipulate circumstances to their advantage. But from this distance, both physical and emotional, their machinations no longer held power over my daily existence. I had established boundaries, reclaimed my autonomy, and created consequences for their actions. Whether they eventually learned from those consequences was entirely up to them. My responsibility now was to myself, to the authentic connections I chose to nurture, and to the creative work that gave my life meaning. The diamond pendant caught the sunlight, sending prisms of color across the porch railing. Once again, I touched it gently, feeling its solid presence against my skin. When my daughter made me sleep in the attic, I said softly to the ocean breeze, I revealed I own their entire mortgage, but more importantly, I discovered I own my entire life. The revelation wasn't in the financial power I had reclaimed, though that certainly mattered. The true revelation was in recognizing my own worth beyond what I could provide to others, in choosing self-respect over exploitation, authenticity over manipulation, forward motion over stagnation in toxic patterns. As the afternoon sun warmed my face, I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, filling my lungs with salt air and possibility. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, I would face them from a foundation of strength and clarity that no one could take from me again. My home was now truly my own. Not just the physical structure with its welcoming rooms and ocean views, but the life I had chosen to create within and beyond its walls. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.